Now I want to dance, I want to win, I want that trophy. So dance good.
Pulp Fiction makes an easy question hard. When did this movie come out?
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
It feels like it could have been made in the 1970s or 90s, or maybe just last year. So how exactly did Quentin Tarantino make something that's literally and figuratively timeless?
You gotta call some people? Well then do it!
His first try was Reservoir Dogs in 1992. It has a lot in common with his other work, including the famous Tarantino dialogue.
All right, I mean, I'll tip if somebody really deserves a tip. If they really put forth the effort, I'll give them something extra. But I mean, it's tipping automatically. It's for the birds.
One thing Reservoir Dogs experiments with is time period. Almost the whole story happens in one building, and every character is dressed in the same suit. A reason for this specific wardrobe is simple. Men have worn suits since the 1800s, so the fit makes sense at any point since then. Combine the vague location and classic outfits, and you get a movie that could have existed in a bunch of eras.
There's two ways you can go on this job. My way or the highway.
2 years later, in 1994, Tarantino made Pulp Fiction, and it's one of the most beloved movies ever. From the aesthetic, to the story, to the dialogue.
What ain't no country I ever heard of? They speak English and what?
It's memorable and immersive in a way that no other movie has been. Amongst every iconic detail, one thing stands out. Pulp Fiction might be the most timeless movie ever made.
I think we should be leaving now.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
I do believe Marcellus, my husband, your boss, told you to take me out and do whatever I wanted.
If you watch a movie from the 1980s, you might notice a lot of fog and preppy clothes. In a 90s movie, you'll see someone hacking into the mainframe. 10 years later, action movies started using this infamous filter for any dry location, especially Mexico. You can usually tell when a film was made just by how it looks and what happens in it. For example, when you see Spy Kids, you just know that it was made in the 2000s.
On her wedding day, she felt like she would rather brave 1,000 deadly missions than go through with what she was about to attempt.
Why is that?
Pulp Fiction is different. Even though it came out in 1994, it feels like it could have been made anytime in the last 65 years. So how did Tarantino change the formula? The answer comes from who Quentin Tarantino is as a person.
What do they look like, Jimmy?
Dorks. They look like a couple of dorks.
Without giving a whole biography, the most important thing to know about Tarantino is that his entire life is film. He's seen every relevant movie ever, and probably most irrelevant ones too. On top of that, Tarantino admitted that not much else went on in his life until he got famous. All he had was watching movies, so for years, that's all he did.
It was a great time. We were always watching movies and expanding on them.
Because of his obsessive viewership, Tarantino is one of the most referential filmmakers ever. His movies are full of shots from other films, and characters inspired by other films, and moments that pay homage to other films. So much of what he makes is his own take on his favorite movies. But Tarantino likes movies from every decade of film history. So the result is that his own films have elements from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and so on. And that's the heart of what makes his work so timeless.
I mean, he'd done his duty, went home to your great-grandmother, took the watch off, put an old coffee can, and in that can it stayed.
Pulp Fiction is the perfect example. It takes iconic symbols from multiple eras and puts them all in the same story. There's the 60s diner and dance scene.
One lucky couple will win this handsome trophy that Marilyn here is holding.
And the blaxploitation era 70s look of Samuel L. Jackson.
Don't do unless.
Unless what?
Unless you do it first.
Spoken like a true prodigy.
And we can't forget the soundtrack, which has songs from the 1920s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 90s. Tarantino didn't just pick random parts of the past to use in Pulp Fiction. He intentionally selected iconic, recognizable parts, so that even if you didn't live during the 1960s, the diner dance scene still feels like the 60s. When you combine all of these symbols from different eras, you get moments that feel like 6 decades all in one, which starts to create that timeless feeling. But it isn't enough just to put famous parts of history in a movie. I mean, Miracle is about a 1980 hockey team, but we can clearly tell it's from the 2000s.
Tonight, we are the greatest hockey team in the world.
More important than using history itself, Tarantino's secret for making timeless movies is this: using elements from film history. In Pulp Fiction, it isn't just that they're doing a 60s dance in a 60s diner. They're doing a 60s dance in a 60s diner that's directly inspired by a 60s movie. Tarantino's version of the sequence starts on a drawn-out, wide camera angle that doesn't move, which is how most of the shots from the 50s and early 60s look. That shot is followed up by a handheld, tighter camera angle of the same dance, which is the style of many famous 70s movies. After those two is a shot that's more free and follows the dancers, which feels like a mix of the two and more like a 90s shot. You get the idea. It's a clear example of how Tarantino goes beyond just using history in his work. He uses the styles and trends of film throughout time to make something that's ageless.
My ideas of the 30s are not from reading in history books, it's from seeing movies of the 30s. That's the people's vernacular, the way the clothes that they wear. That captures our culture better than any other landmark of the time is films.
Pulp Fiction uses so many elements of film history, it's hard to keep track. Samuel L. Jackson's character, Jules, is directly inspired by the blaxploitation characters of the 70s.
Fool to have to be pulling these hush puppies out your mother.
Bruce Willis, on the other hand, is inspired by the character Mike Hammer in Kiss Me Deadly.
My name is Mike Hammer, if it matters.
Side note, Kiss Me Deadly also has a glowing briefcase, just like the one in Pulp Fiction. The way that Mia and Vincent flirt is modeled after the relationship between Walter and Hildy in the 1940 movie His Girl Friday.
I'd know you anytime, any place.
Anywhere. You're repeating yourself, Walter. That's the speech you made the night you proposed.
On top of everything else, the entire story of Pulp Fiction is told out of order, which became popular in the 1970s. It's fitting that a timeless movie would tell its story out of chronological order. Add on the variety of performances, wardrobe, music, visuals, characters, plot points, and everything else, and you get a perfect web of moments throughout time.
This watch was on your daddy's wrist when they were shot down over Hanoi.
Mr. Brown, Mr. White, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Blue, Mr. Orange, Mr. Pink.
Why am I Mr. Pink?
So that's Tarantino's recipe for timeless movies. Historical icons combined with styles and trends from film history, and a whole lot of creativity to top it off. Not too hard to do, right? Well, not quite everyone can do it, but certain filmmakers have been able to use Tarantino's approach to make timeless movies of their own. It Follows is a modern horror classic, and just like Pulp Fiction, it feels like it could have come out in multiple different eras. It combines different periods of technology, wardrobe, visuals, and a rural location to accomplish its ageless feel.
Hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
Edward Scissorhands is another movie that uses Tarantino's formula, and the result is a quirky movie that feels permanent.
What is it? Lemonade.
Other movies use the same approach without being as obvious about it, like The Incredibles. The Incredibles is clearly set around 2004 when it came out, but it still feels like it could have been made at any other time. That's because it uses historic icons from different eras, especially the white picket fence aesthetic of the 1950s. I know what you might be thinking. Every movie uses trends from film history. It's unavoidable. And that's true, but most movies aren't nearly as intentional as Pulp Fiction or It Follows. Just for argument's sake, here are some of the less timeless movies in terms of Tarantino's approach. Hurt Locker, which won Best Picture, feels like it only could have come out in the late 2000s. Heat is an insane 1995 action movie that only could have ever been made in 1995.
Give me all you got!
Listen,
Give me all you got!
The original Karate Kid is one of my favorite movies ever, but it's as 80s as an 80s movie can get.
No, ex-degenerate, man. 8 a.m. tomorrow, I'm a senior. I've got 1 year to make it all work.
The same thing goes for The Thing, which is a genius movie that only could have been made in the early 80s. Then there's Everything Everywhere All at Once, Avengers Endgame, the first Transformers, King of New York, Rain Man, and on and on. I like most of these movies, but I think it's hard to argue they feel timeless. In fact, that's part of why people like rewatching them, because they're like time capsules. Still, I could list countless movies that don't feel like Tarantino's, because they're a lot more common than movies that stand outside of time.
We get there. When time come, you let me help you.
Tarantino continued to develop his timeless approach with his other films. Again, he's seen so many movies that it feels like half of his ideas pay homage to something else. They're this beautiful mosaic of Tarantino's interests, which happen to be limited to movies. Most writing and directing teachers will tell you that if you want to be a good filmmaker, you have to go out and live, experience pain and joy, and really take in the world around you. Tarantino went exactly the opposite way, as he tends to do, and proved once again that there are no hard rules to filmmaking. You can be someone with no idea what real life feels like, and still make some of the most important movies ever. All it takes is a touch of genius and deep, deep passion. That's easy enough, right? Thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. Stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.